News 11 Investigates Case Files, where we go deeper into some of the investigations you see in our newscasts. I'm Melissa Andrews.
And I'm Brian Duggar. This week, we're highlighting contractor scams. Our team has spent months on these types of stories, protecting consumers and working to bring scam contractors to light. We've got 3 of our biggest stories to share with you this week, and we'll tell you how to avoid these scams and being ripped off.
We're going over these situations today with Lane Montz, president of the Better Business Bureau, who knows what to look for and how to spot the red flags. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
I'm going to get right into it. We've got 3 big scams where people have lost thousands of dollars. And in many of these cases, I think they end up either still unhappy or they go to court and still don't end up collecting any money. So the first scam involves emails, and that's how we usually hear from this, right? Into our Call 11 for Action line, or somebody sending an email. So we got some emails from former employees of a man named Joseph Schlosser, who is the owner of Building with Faith Construction. Other emails we got from people who say they were past customers. So he was the focus of our report, highlighting Lisa Boylan and Teresa Cooper, 2 of his customers who paid thousands for remodeling projects. And either that work was never done or the work still has not been done months later. Boylan paid over $3,500 December 30th to start remodeling her bathroom to help out her daughter, who's in a wheelchair. But as of now, the work still hasn't started. Cooper paid more than $67,000 for exterior renovations to her home since May of last year. $13,000, which was out of pocket, to now 2 former employees of Building with Faith Construction. She says she stopped paying in November. And here's what we know. Right now, this man is facing charges and lawsuits in several counties. 2 5th-degree theft charges, 4th-degree theft charges, engaging in corrupt activity. In Henry County, 2 4th-degree felony theft charges, a civil lawsuit in Paulding County. There's a big judgment against him, a couple $100,000 in Lucas County, and 8 complaints with the Ohio Attorney General's office in Defiance County.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. And you know, the one thing we have people reach out to us more than anything about are these shady contractors.
It really is.
And you know, Lane's an expert on this, obviously.
Careful, Brian, careful about that, throwing that word around.
Yeah, but I mean, you actually have a construction background.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, I mean, when you hear stories about this, I mean, what goes through your mind?
Well, it sounds terrible. You hate to hear that. Luckily, the number of bad contractors like that are like in criminal trouble is pretty low. But there are a lot of good contractors out there, but when you hear a story like this where there's a lot of money involved, really any money involved, where somebody's not getting the work, that's kind of heartbreaking. It's bad for the profession. It's bad for the community. You don't like to hear that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, so these were remodeling jobs, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So I guess we should just talk about, I mean, what do you want, what should people look for, I guess?
Well, I think one of the issues I think that came up in this story is that they're paying a lot of money up front, and that always seems to be one of the red flags and consistencies that we see in these contractor complaints. How should money be handled? I notice a lot of cash exchange hands when things tend to go wrong, and the amount is very high. What's the recommendation on money and payment?
Well, I don't like cash payments to contractors. As a construction law attorney, as a construction law professor, as a BBB CEO, I don't like cash transactions, especially with contractors. And I don't like prepaid cash transactions especially. The reality is, a lot of times for small jobs, you know, if it's just tearing down a shed or something, and you know the guy through church or through friends or something, or the lady, I shouldn't just say guy, you know, paying cash probably, it's not the official position of the BBB, but it's probably okay. But when you're talking about 4 digits and 5 digits like you're talking about here, no way. No way should that happen. It shouldn't happen after the project's done. I know it's legal tender, but it's just not good smart business.
One of the things that I think is interesting, and we experienced this, we built a house and our landscaper, who we loved and we had no problems with, but one of the things I really learned is that a lot of people who are contractors and business owners in the blue collar workforce, whether it be plumbers or landscapers or painters, they're not necessarily a white collar business person. So they don't really operate many times their business in a way that most businesses operate. For example, I've seen a lot of like, you go out and have an estimate. Well, I think I could do it for $1,500 or, let me see when I can get over there. And that is how a lot of people who keep their business kind of inside of a work truck every day, that's kind of how it goes, I would say. So I don't think an alarm bell necessarily could go off or should go off at that point.
So I did spend about 25 years in construction. I actually held a contractor's license for a while with the city of Toledo, for a long time actually. The difference between contractors that stay small, themselves, maybe some helpers, and those that grow, right? And those that go on, is the difference, Melissa, is their ability to handle what you called the white collar side of the business, right? There are a lot of very good tradespeople out there, but they struggle with taxes and insurance and contracts. They're afraid of them or they don't understand them. They're just not trained. That is the difference maker. And so you can never guarantee, I'm not going to say that all cash transactions turn out to be bummers like these are going to be, but there are some tried and true things that you should just approach every construction project as a consumer from the same process, really.
Now, you mentioned estimates. So, talk about estimates a little. Like if some guy comes in and says, yeah, I think I can do this for $1,500, and then he comes back and gives you, nah, that actually cost me about $3,000. So,
yeah, isn't there something in the law that they are required to provide you a written estimate?
There are 3 laws that pertain to residential or consumer-oriented construction. There's the Home Solicitation Sales Act, which is the 3-day cooling off period for contracts. There's the Consumer Sales Practices Act, and then there's the Home Construction Services Act. I don't think I got all the words right there, but it's a mouthful. So there are 3 laws that pertain, and they are supposed to be in writing. So there are some contractors that can look at a small project and ballpark it pretty accurately. That doesn't mean that's what you should form the relationship on. If they can ballpark it accurately, excuse me, they can also write it up accurately, right? So I can throw darts at a dartboard and I will occasionally get a bullseye even if I cover my eyes. It's just not the best way to go about the situation. Written estimates, you should have those. The down payment should be limited. You should pay with a physical check so that there's a receipt. There's some basics there.
And what happens, to Brian's question, what happens if, you start the job, you sign the contract, if there is one, and you both agree on $1,500, and then they come back and say, no, it's going to be $3,000?
So it depends on how the contract's written. So really in construction, you can't separate price from scope. You cannot separate price from scope.
What does that mean?
So scope is the work that is being promised for price. So one of the ways that you can have price is the one that everybody thinks of is a flat price. If you're getting a flat price, and as a consumer you usually want that most of the time, you have to have a good scope. So if you're getting a $15,000 roof job, you don't want the scope of work to say replace roof. Right, there's got to be a scope of work,
like
that line item
like
details.
Remove work, remove existing roof.
Yes.
And maybe the amount of employees that it'll take in hours. If you can get, if more detailed, the better.
Well, yes, usually. I don't think I've never seen one where they detail the number of employees. The other kind of contract is a time and materials contract, which is kind of like an open checkbook. And there are times when that's a better contract to have sometimes the contractor can't know what's behind a wall, so maybe the beginning of the job, they open up a hole in the ceiling and then you're going to pay by the hour for that.
They discover some problems or something.
Until they can peel back, open the curtain, pull back the curtain. But so back to your question about price. When you're getting a price, particularly a fixed price, you want to have that written estimate And good contractors are not afraid to line item what they're going to do, right? I worked for a major general contractor here in this area for 20-something years as their general counsel, and they gave detailed, dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of lines of what they were going to do for that price. So the more detailed, the better. That's so that the buyer can be informed. Now, the buyer is probably not going to understand all those lines, but if a dispute does develop, you can go back to that. I don't want to take your paper away permanently, but you can go back to that line item estimate, and you can say they did this, they didn't do this. It helps you resolve it when things go sour.
Don't you think it would be difficult too, because let's say in a case where you do open up the wall, you're not an expert, I'm not an expert, you have to really trust that that person's not taking you for a ride. And we've seen that happen with at least one of these contractors also, where they can depend on you being oblivious to the scope of that work. I don't know anything about roofing, so how do I know if I need a this, or this?
Yeah, and it can put you as a consumer, once it's opened up, let's say you live in a house with one bathroom. Once they pull the sink and the toilet and disconnect the shower,
you're at their mercy.
You're kind of at their mercy. So you want to have an understanding. This is absolutely true when it comes to construction, just as it does with all human relationships. Work out the problems earlier while it's a splinter. Don't wait till it becomes a gangrenous infection that requires amputation. So go through, people don't want to have those difficult discussions, but it's okay to put your contractor on the spot before you sign the contractor and think about things and work through it. And from the contractor's perspective, if they're honest and a good contractor, they're going to want to work out those problems ahead of time too.
Yeah, and I think this might be one of the most obvious questions, because I think some people are like, well, my aunt had this guy and he did a pretty good job, so maybe you should get him too. But
That's a big one.
So how should a person really go about picking a contractor?
Well, lots of contractors, there's a lot of ratings online. BBB, what I run, we have a huge database of contractors with ratings, and you can see their complaint history through the BBB, but you can also go to other sources where they're being reviewed.
So you're saying you don't just, and this is going to come up in Mary Davis's story next, you don't just take word of mouth, you take the advice, but then you go and do your own research, sounds like what you're saying.
Trust but verify, right?
Yeah.
You give people the benefit of the doubt, but immediately if you're starting to get a bad feeling, I think a construction project, they're working on your home, that's your castle, you live there, it's very intimate. Homeowners always remember the details of the project better than the contractor. They remember when the contractor's employees took too many smoke breaks, in their opinion. They remember everything. Homeowners remember because it's personal to them. So these are often big money projects, and I just think that homeowners frequently don't vet the contractors. Sometimes I think it's the homeowner's fault for not vetting.
Right.
You got to be a little smarter about, if you're going to spend $8,000, that's a lot of money.
So other than the BBB, where would be some good places to get some information on whether this is a good contractor to hire?
Well, if they're a licensed contractor by the state of Ohio, you can call the licensing bureau down in Ohio. If they're locally licensed, like Ohio does not have a general contractor's license statewide. They have them for electricians, plumbers, HVAC, boilers, and a few other elevators and a few other categories. Ohio is one of those states that does not have a statewide general contractor license. Michigan does. So to get those licenses, you have to take classes in business and ethics. You're a little bit vetted. I wish Ohio did have a general contractor's license. There's no appetite for it politically. But you can go there to the licensing bureau. You can go to their Facebook page. You can ask them for references. Now, most of those references are going to probably be in the bag for them, but not all. Not all of them will be. And then you just got to use your judgment. If they show up in the Beverly Hillbillies mobile, I used to hire employees, and if they came up, I would watch them come from their truck or their van to see how they conducted themselves. I'd make them sit in the lobby and then I'd ask the receptionist, how were they as a person? And sometimes they'd open their van door and beer cans would fall out. You probably don't want to hire that person.
Don't you? I wish that some of the people that we've worked with over the years had checked with their local county court, the civil court, or the city court to find out about previous lawsuits. I think that's a really important one to look into. Previous lawsuits and complaints within where you live. You can type their name in, and usually if it's a shoddy contractor who has a big reputation for this stuff, there will be at least a few complaints or lawsuits.
So when people apply to become members of the Better Business Bureau, part of our vetting process is to check the court systems, local, state, federal, in that service area, and sometimes beyond. That's a great piece of advice, I think.
I was just going to say that's Investigator 101. When we hear about someone who's in trouble or someone's alleging something about them, first thing we want to do is we go to the courts, look them up, do a little background search on them, and you know, that can be pretty revealing if you got a contractor who's got, 10 lawsuits against them or anything. But you had mentioned Mary Davis, and we should talk about her a little bit. She was actually I had dealt with her on another case, so I was familiar with her. And you did this story, but she knew this guy, and she kind of trusted that.
Well, it was another situation where her sister gave her a recommendation. And what happened too, I think we should talk about this, a lot of times when you need a contractor, it's an emergency situation. And so that's what happened with Mary in Fostoria. She had some pipes burst while she was out of town to this kind of historic house that she had just purchased. And she said, you know what, I'm really not looking for perfection here. I have these adopted children. She's an older woman. And a lot of the contractors that she came across wouldn't touch the homes until she got the burst pipes repaired. So that's how she got with this man named M.J. Stevens, who her sister recommended. And he said, I can get this done for you quick. But she said in the course of his work, he never put up any plastic or anything. The whole house became contaminated. So when she then went to more contractors to try to clean up his work, another thing we find, they don't want to touch someone else's work. So here's another thing. She's conflict avoidance. So she just went with it. We saw where he would leave his tools, and I've seen that with different contractors. They leave their tools there. I don't know if it's a way that they want you to make you feel that they're going to come back, so they leave their bags of tools. And here's another thing. Her insurance company cut him a check for over $27,000. So I wanted to ask you about that in just a minute. And so basically, when this whole thing went left, her insurance company is like, well, it's on you to pick the person. We're going to pay them.
That's true. That is true.
So she was like, how did we know that he wasn't going to walk away with all this money? We did find in Lucas County Common Pleas Court, a family sued him in 2020 for breach of contract, negligence, deceptive practices. He settled, and when he didn't originally comment on our story, but he came back and said, I've been in communication with Mary, and there's a set date to complete the work. I will tell you that may have happened, but Mary was never happy with him. I think Mary is just a nice woman who, frankly, I think in this particular contractor, and we haven't done more stories, but we've talked to like a dozen people literally about this man, M.J. Stevens, and people get tired of it. They get exhausted of it. They just want to be done with it.
Yeah, so I think the point you're getting at, so the insurance company cut the check to him for $27,000. And when that happened, there wasn't anything bringing him back because he already got his money.
Yeah, I didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So is that typical?
Well, so I spent over 20 years in that industry. So that situation is very common. It is an extra, as if construction contracts between residential people and contractors is not complicated enough, and it is pretty complicated. Adding the insurance company into the mix is another variable, and sometimes those projects go on a long time and it's actually not the contractor's fault because the contractor and the insurance company are fighting about the scope of work, which of course leads to the price. They're fighting about the price probably, and thus the scope of work. So that is somewhat common in the insurance restoration industry. However,
and you can't say to your insurance company, hey, can you give me the check and I'll disperse it as I see fit? Can you argue that, or?
So you'd have to be very vigilant. So a lot of contractors that operate in that space have clauses in the contract that assign the insurance proceeds to the contractor up to the value of the work. I know this because I've written them. I wrote those clauses. And so when you sign the contract, you have agreed to that term, and the contractor can give the insurance company a copy. Some insurance companies will not honor those, even though they should honor those. Some insurance policies prevent that, but some insurance companies do honor that and will pay the contractor. Okay, but I just want to add, you can always withdraw that, and you can always complain to your insurance company. It's just those jobs are not going to fly on autopilot, Melissa. They require an active homeowner. I mean, in that case, they got a contract. Always get a contract. Always get a contract.
Okay, so one of our biggest series that we've done is on a man named David Broadway. You may have heard of him. We actually heard his name here on WTOL back in 2007, and then he came back to our airwaves in 2023 when we learned about him scamming people for driveway jobs, elderly people. And this man, boy, he made it around Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, South Carolina. We heard of him being in Florida. Dozens of people, same complaint. He agrees to do a driveway job, usually elderly people, for a couple of $100, and then it turns into thousands. And he didn't stop there. He scammed an Army veteran that gave him $4,200. So 2 years later, we're still getting calls and emails about David Broadway. There have been attempts by police to get him behind bars, but nobody seems to be able to pin him down.
So I have heard about this. I came to the BBB in 2022. So I believe that those problems involving him have been going on for a while, and they may reappear. I can't say that for sure. I don't want to say that for sure. I don't want to make a factual representation. Yeah. I have not personally been involved in my time as CEO with particular claims, but I have heard the problems. But I will say those driveway scams, when I was newly married to my wife and we bought our first nice house in Sylvania Township, we got scammed, and it wasn't David Broadway, but we got scammed, and those driveway scams have been around a long time.
Yes, so this story actually came to me. They had reached out to me because they said this really elderly guy, I forget how old he was, but I think he's probably 70, 80, maybe even older than that. And Broadway had just come knocking on his door and said, hey, I'm out. I've got a bunch of extra material in my truck, and I'd like to just dump it here for like $400 or something. And then he dumps it, spreads it out. And then he's like, well, that's, $4,000 like we agreed on. And so and this is an old guy, and, his daughter was just flabbergasted. Like, what do you mean you gave this guy $4,000? But some of these guys just really prey on the elderly who maybe they have a little dementia. Maybe they're not real confident. Maybe they had just lost their wife and they're not used to handling the money, but this seemed to be what he was doing. I mean, he would particularly target elderly, go up and try to take advantage. Sometimes they would write him a check and he would add a zero.
I don't like anyone that comes to the door and solicits, personally. Yeah. I think that tells me that maybe you don't have enough work and you need the work, and then I question why you need the work.
I can't tell how Melissa feels about that situation.
Well, yeah, so we're going to wrap it up here in a couple minutes, but just talk about that. I mean, what if somebody comes to your door and they got this deal that's just too good to be true?
Okay, so there are organizations that use door-to-door canvassing, and they are careful. There are laws to comply with. You have to let the local law enforcement know. So if somebody knocks on your door and they've got all the card and everything, you can pump the brakes and say, hold on, please, get their name. You can call your local law enforcement, right? If you're in the city, call the police. If you're in the county, call the sheriff. They are supposed to register under the laws called the Green River Ordinances. And most communities have those. If they haven't registered, they've skipped a critical step, and they're not legally allowed to sell that way. There are a few companies that are very good, and they do follow the law. So I don't want to paint them with a broad brush.
Sure.
But I do understand what you're saying, because when there's somebody in your door, you are feeling pressure.
Pressure, high
You're
pressure.
feeling pressure, and emotions come to bear, and those are the hallmarks of scams. It doesn't mean everyone's a scam, but scammers use that feeling of pressure to get you to capitulate. And they're banking on the fact that you're risk averse. So if you've got somebody at your door soliciting, selling, or whatever, you really do have to pump the brakes and find some intestinal fortitude. Say, I'm going to call and check on you first, close the door, and do your own investigation.
Lane, we got to wrap up, but
Okay.
I want you to share with everyone the saying that you told me, and I tell everybody this when we talk about contractors. What is it?
They're all very good looking like me. No,
the
no,
two
the
of
other
the
one.
three thing.
You get to pick price, speed, quality. Price, speed, quality. Those are the three dimensions of a project for construction. And you only get 2 out of 3. If you want a low price, you're not you can't also get it fast and high quality. One of those
Gotta
other
pick.
two's got to one of those other two's got to sacrifice. If you want it fast and you want it quality, you're going to pay.
Isn't that good
I'm
advice?
telling you,
That's good
that
advice.
that is like a principle of physics, like gravity. There's no way around it. If even I've seen family members. We get calls from the BBB where a father and a son. The son's doing a project, and the father wanted to file a complaint because they had it out. Nothing is sacred when it comes to your home. Nothing is sacred when it comes to your finances. Price, quality, speed, pick any two.
Lane Mons, thanks for the wisdom, and hopefully people can watch this episode, because I know a lot of times by the time they get to us, there's not much we can do in terms of returning the money to you. So hopefully some of these tips help before you even get to that situation. Thanks so much for joining us here on 11 Investigates Case Files. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.